Hi, it's Alistair from Electric Scotland. Just doing an introduction to my weekly newsletter for September the 6th, 2019. Okay, the news story I've picked for you this week. Costs soar at a tell of mum and dad. It says about a quarter of young adults in the UK aged 20 to 34 live at home, a figure which, according to the Office for National Statistics, has been growing steadily for 15 years. That's a lot of kids living at home, and of course, if you read the article, you'll find there's a lot that come out of university and have to go home to mum and dad because they haven't got a job yet, or a lot of them can't afford the rent of their rented accommodation and are returning home as well. So certainly if mum and dad looking to retire, it's probably going to be a bit more difficult for them. But certainly it's an interesting article and covers quite a lot of interesting information. So well worth a read that, I think. That's from the BBC. Okay, the next story is also from the BBC. It's Scotland's genetic landscape reflects Dark Age populations. It says the findings mean people still live in the same areas as our direct ancestors. Okay, that's another interesting article, that. Then grave with 6 skulls could be a clan feud burial site. This is another one from the BBC. It says historically, the area of Easter Ross was the scene of a feud between the clans Ross and Mackay. Then from the Scotsman, we've got Nicola Sturgeon accused of running out of ideas and time by MSPs. Said in a debate on the PFG in Holyrood today, MSPs from across the political spectrum accused the government of lacking in ambition and audacity and of a failure to tackle an index of incompetence in domestic policies. And then from the Brexit Central website, we've got beware the threat to our defence autonomy coming from the EU. Says the consequences for the UK if the defence and security sections of the current exit arrangements laid down in Theresa May's withdrawal agreement and the political declaration are approved. Then you can forget having lunch in an independent Scotland. Scotland has been subsidised since 1983 by the UK, and by April 2020 will have been subsidised since 1980. It's really just those that are looking for Scottish independence. I mean, they need to be totally aware of the financial implications of that. And then finally, most valuable collection of whisky ever to be sold at auction could go for up to 4 million. A spirits collection that's been described as the holy grail of whisky, which is estimated to be worth up to 4 million, is set to go up for auction in London this month. So if you want to get your bids in, maybe you want to read that article. And that's from the Scotsman, the food and drink area. And that's really all the news I've got for you. I mean, there's just so much news on the Brexit stuff, which is basically that they're forcing through a condition that we must have a deal. So they want to take no deal off the table. Boris Johnson wants an election, but he hasn't got enough votes to get an election because it's the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which requires 2/3 majority of the MPs, and he hasn't got that, basically. So I suspect he'll eventually get it, but And frankly, we need an election. We've got to sort this out one way or another. The Remainers are just traitors to the country. They've got no faith in the country at all. They believe the EU can run us much better than the people in Britain can. I think it's appalling, quite honestly, but I've said it before. And frankly, I'm just sick fed up of it, really. Okay, so on to Electric Canadian. I've got 3 articles for you this week. The Saults of Today, that's Saint Sault Marie, which is up in the northern Great Lakes at Superior, northern Ontario, and borders with the USA and Michigan. It says, American and Canadian, the key to the Great Lakes and nation's commerce passes by its doors. The greatest locks in the world, illustrated and described. The establishment of great industries and the development of the rich Algoma County is building up great cities where once the red man held undisputed sway. The romance and legend of the land of Hiawatha. So that's a really old book, quite interesting. That was a nice lot of black and white pictures submitted in it. I think you might want to have a read of that. Then, next one is a summary, historical and political, of the first planting, progressive improvements and present state of the British settlements in North America. It's by William Douglas, MD, in 2 volumes and produced in 1760. I would caution you, it's an excellent book, 2 volumes, but it's in the old writing style where they take the letter S and make it a letter F. So it makes it a bit challenging to read, but quite frankly, if you try it out, you'll find after a short time you kind of get used to it, really. But some fascinating information on the early history of the continent. And then the third and final one I've got for you is Vulcan, a town in the Canadian prairies of southern Alberta. And Spock's been there, I will say. Spock's been there. So I thought you might like to read that. I will say that part of the reason for highlighting this town is that the Vulcan Advocate is a local newspaper, and there's literally hundreds of copies of it on the Internet Archive. So just for that reason alone, I thought I'd do a feature on it. Now on to Electric Scotland. I've got an autobiography of Thomas Guthrie, DD, and a memoir by his sons, the Reverend David K. Guthrie and Charles J. Guthrie, M.A., in 2 volumes. It's 1874 to 5. It's really quite a... You know how I love biographies, and that's really worth reading. And then we got up The Home Preacher, The Service of Week 4, which is by Dr. Raleigh. And then All I've Ever Known. This is Margaret Gallagher's story. My Thatched Cottage Without Modern Amenities. It's a documentary I produced for the BBC in 1992, now with over 1 million views. And quite frankly, I think it's really interesting. I enjoyed it. And then homilies from Nola Crew. Nola sent in, she did The Creation Story, which was given on the 1st September 2019, and she took a video of, or a video was taken of her giving the sermon, and I thought you might like to watch that. And then Scotland's Work and Worth. It's an epitome of Scotland's story from early times to the 20th century, with a survey of the contributions of Scotsmen in peace and in war to the growth of the British Empire and the progress of the world, by Charles W. Thompson, and it's in 2 volumes, published in 1909. Some really interesting stuff in there. So I hope you'll enjoy reading that. And then we have a couple of newsletters, one from the Clachlachlan Association of Canada, with their fall 2019 newsletter, and also the Scottish Society of Indianapolis. I got in their August 2019 newsletter. And the story this week is, it's really, we need to widen our views is the title of it. But this week I'm taking a Canadian History magazine article in which Canada's history asks several prominent historians and authors to weigh Macdonald's achievement against his failures and to explore the challenges that surround commemoration in general. The essays offer unique and important perspectives. They don't all agree, but together their insights help us to develop a deeper understanding of the complex issues at hand. So I've given you a link there to the Canadian History website where you can read the stuff about John A. Macdonald. But I will say that in the actual article that I took one of the articles and put it in. It says understanding Canadian history requires both context and a sense of proportion. I'm glad we're having this debate, it says. I'm happy that Canadians are being jolted out of historical amnesia, as we argue about what version of the past we want to tell. We're being forced to recognise that today has been shaped by yesterday. But I'm not happy that these discussions are drenched in moral judgments by our forebears, without any acknowledgement that our predecessors lived in a world radically different from ours, different in ideologies, challenges, constraints and goals, individual being ripped out of context and their character trashed with no attempt to understand the past on its own terms. He says, I'm not advocating that every single historical figure should be revered as legendary, but surely we can have a sense of proportion by whose achievements still merit respect and whose legacy is too toxic to swallow. So let's start with the recent shredding of Sir John A. Macdonald's reputation. There are proposals that his name should be removed from Ontario public schools. The Canadian Historical Association's prestigious Sir John A. Macdonald Prize has been rebanded as the CHA's Best Scholarly Book in Canadian History Prize. Last summer, one statue of Macdonald was removed from outside Victoria City's Hall, while two more, one in Winnipeg, a second in Montreal, were defaced. Macdonald's offence was his role in the residential school system, a system that has been established before he became Prime Minister, that peaked about 40 years after his death, that continued under 18 more Prime Ministers before the last school finally closed in 1996. As the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada reported, the system was a catastrophe for Indigenous peoples in Canada. The children were horrifically abused, their cultures destroyed, and the community shattered. The issue, I would argue, is not who to blame, rather how did this happen? How can we understand the past where people acted in ways that today we consider shocking? Instead of rushing to judgment and a triumphant display of wokeness, what about widening the perspective to see what was actually going on back then? It says, as I watched television clips from Victoria of Macdonald's statue being carted away, I noticed a ridiculous irony. Fixed to the wall on the other side of the doors was the city's coat of arms. It is laden with colonial symbols. Two blonde angels represent colonization and civilization, with an all-seeing eye, the dove of peace, and a crusader helmet to represent Christianity. As if the name of British Columbia's capital and the Union Jack embedded in the provincial flag weren't enough, this coat of arms hints that the British Empire lives on. The coat of arms reflects the beliefs with which Macdonald was raised. Britain was the motherland. Christian evangelism was used to justify oppression, and now discredited theories of racial hierarchies held sway. So John A was a man of his time, but he was also a powerful leader. He moulded a handful of shabby British colonies into a new country and built a coast-to-coast railway to bind it together. He propelled the new dominion towards autonomy. Without MacDonald, would there even have been a Canada? The Fathers of Confederation developed a radical new idea on which to establish this country, a compromise between English-speaking and French-speaking settlers. In keeping with attitudes of the time, they failed to include First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in this bargain, and Canadians as well as Indigenous communities have been the poorer for that omission ever since. Yet the idea of a nation based on political rather than ethnic links would, in the future, allow Canada to become the beacon of pluralism that our current Prime Minister loves to celebrate. I can't help wondering why our first Prime Minister had to be banished from Victoria's City Hall, while the province continues to embrace peachy-cheeked angels in Crusader armour. The crucial role that the resourceful, risk-taking, pragmatic MacDonald played in shaping this country cannot be expunged from our history as briskly as his statue. Meanwhile, in a province with some of the largest non-settler, outdated symbols are still allowed to tell a story of white supremacy and racial bigotry. So Johnny MacDonald is far from the only national leader under attack these days. Statues and busts in public places explicitly celebrate their subjects. The debate about which historical figures should be toppled from their plinths is happening in several countries that are reframing their national narratives. Sometimes the purges are easy to justify. Depictions of brutal dictators rarely survive the tyrant's deaths. You won't find monuments to Adolf Hitler anywhere in Germany, and Antonio de Oliveira Santazar is invisible in Portugal. There are apparently remote Russian fields crammed with banished statues of Stalin. However, on a recent trip to St. Petersburg, I noticed a monumental statue of Lenin, who, despite unleashing violence and purges, has escaped obliteration because he overthrew Tsarist oppression. Equally easy to understand are the re-evaluations of the contributors made by some men who were utilised for decades after their deaths, such as Cecil Rhodes in Britain and some leaders in the southern United States. The most compelling argument to remove their statues is that the subjects' whole careers were dedicated to upholding white supremacy, as imperialists in the case of Rhodes, or defenders of the institution of slavery in the case of Confederate heroes. I'm happy to see their lumps of masonry sent into exile. It is also instructive to see how, in some instances, history spoke to the present loudly and clearly. In Charlottesville, Virginia, the removal of an equestrian monument to Confederate leader and Civil War hero Robert E. Lee sparked an ugly outburst from all-right protesters shouting racist slogans. But often, more surprising figures have been caught up in these debates. Mohandas K. Gandhi seems an unlikely symbol of racial arrogance. Nelson Mandela once described the Indian leader as the best hope for future race relations. Yet in 2016, the University of Ghana removed a statue of Gandhi from its campus after an online campaign, charged him with racism against black Africans. His extraordinary achievements in campaigning for the British departure from India with non-violent protest was not enough to save him. At this point, I ask myself, can anybody survive scrutiny? Which historical figure is completely free of flaws? Some of the most celebrated heroes of progressive causes, among them Canadian suffragist Nellie McClung and British author George Bernard Shaw, endorse Eutychides. How do we balance our admiration for some of our predecessors' ideas against our abhorrence of others among their beliefs? I suggest that the only way is to widen the lens when reviewing historical figures. Don't banish Sir John A. Macdonald in an Orwellian attempt to clean up the past. Instead, present him in all his complexity as both a 19th century patriarch and, to quote the title of Richard Gwynn's biography, the man who made us. Don't eliminate him from view. Instead, amplify the information provided on the plaques and inscriptions that accompany his monuments. Yes, MacDonald was implicated in the cruel treatment of indigenous peoples, and it is important to recognise that. But that's only one aspect of a substantial legacy. We need to be more tolerant of the moral feelings of our predecessors, not as an act of charity to them, but an act of charity to ourselves. Our own unconscious assumptions and cultural habits are doubtless just as impregnated with biases as theirs were. The next generation is already berating mine for our wanton destruction of the environment, for our needless cruelty to factory farmed animals, for our blind embrace of consumerism. If you want the future to respect our moment in history, perhaps we should expand our knowledge of the past before we launch into spasms of outrage. I thought that was a very balanced view of this topic and subject. And certainly it's how we're brought up today that tends to change our views on things. And I think you put it in a very good way there. So John A. Macdonald, frankly, I think he's still a great leader of Canada, and he's the guy that created Canada at the end of the day and became the first Prime Minister after Confederation. I think it's a wonderful, but even in Scotland, I mean, they decided that they didn't want to support him anymore. But that, unfortunately, is the small-minded people of the Scottish Nationalist Party. Small minds, never did big things in this world. And MacDonald certainly wasn't a small mind. He had a big vision for how great Canada could be. So, anyway, that was the story, and I thought I'd read it to you because I think it has implications in all kinds of things, and that's why I believe history is very important. You need to understand the history to make sense of the present in so many ways. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that wee story, and me reading it to you, which I normally don't. Okay. So anyway, have a good weekend when it comes, and hope I get some interesting comments from you.